The scars on my daughter's arm are silver now, thin lines that catch the light when she reaches for something on a high shelf. Sometimes I trace them with my fingertips and remember the woman I used to be, the one who believed that family was everything, that blood ties could excuse any cruelty, that love meant swallowing your voice until you choked on it. That woman died on a Sunday afternoon 2 years ago, and I have never mourned her loss. But let me take you back to that morning, to the last time I willingly walked into the house where I grew up, to the moment before everything I thought I knew about loyalty and forgiveness and family burned away like paper in a flame. Lily was 7 years old and believed the world was mostly good. She bounced in the back seat of our aging Honda, her small hands clutching the tin of chocolate chip cookies we had stayed up late baking the night before. She had insisted on adding extra chocolate chips because Grandma loved chocolate, because making people happy was what good girls did, because she had learned from watching me how to perform love even when it was not returned. She wore her favorite dress that morning, lavender, with tiny embroidered butterflies that she said made her look like a princess. I had brushed her hair until it shined, tied it back with a ribbon that matched her dress, and told her how beautiful she was. I wanted her to feel special, to have armor against whatever casual cruelties awaited us. I smiled at her through the rearview mirror, my heart simultaneously swelling with love and contracting with dread. That was the feeling I had learned to carry in my body whenever we visited my parents, a cocktail of hope and fear that left me exhausted before we even arrived. Maybe this time would be different. I told myself the same lie I had been telling myself for 32 years. Maybe this time they would see Lily's joy and choose kindness. Maybe this time Victoria would be in a good mood, generous rather than vicious. Maybe this time I would finally be enough. Victoria would be there today. She was always there these days, a permanent fixture in our childhood home ever since her influencer career exploded, and she decided that living rent-free with our parents was more financially strategic than maintaining her own place. Between photo shoots in Bali and sponsored trips to Dubai, between brand partnerships and influencer events, she returned to that house like a queen to her castle, expecting worship and receiving it. My parents had turned her old bedroom into a shrine, to her success walls covered with framed magazine features and printed Instagram posts, proof that at least one of their daughters had turned out spectacular. I had not turned out spectacular. I had turned out ordinary, a single mother working a modest job, driving a 10-year-old car, living in a small apartment where the heating was unreliable and the neighbors were too loud. I had turned out quiet and careful and perpetually apologetic, always trying to earn love that was never freely given, always wondering what was wrong with me that I could not be golden like Victoria. The dread intensified as we turned onto the familiar street lined with mature oak trees and well-maintained lawns, each house a testament to upper-middle-class stability. I had grown up here, played on these sidewalks, believed this neighborhood represented safety and normalcy. I had not yet learned that beautiful exteriors could hide rot, that manicured lawns could grow over poisoned soil, that the houses where the worst things happened often looked the most perfect from the outside. As we pulled into the driveway of the 2-story colonial, with its blue shutters and wraparound porch, my hands began to tremble on the steering wheel. I could already hear them. Raised voices bleeding through the walls, through the carefully cultivated image of domestic harmony my parents projected to the world. My mother's placating tones, my father's gruff dismissals, and cutting through it all like a knife. Victoria's voice sharp and demanding and utterly certain of her right to take whatever she wanted. Lily's excited chatter died mid-sentence. Even at 7, she had learned to read the signs, to sense when adult emotions were turning dangerous, to make herself small and quiet and easy to overlook. I hated that she had learned this. I hated that I had taught her through my own example how to shrink, how to disappear, how to survive, in spaces where your existence was treated as an inconvenience. I forced brightness into my voice as I turned off the engine. "Come on, sweetheart," I said, as if we were walking into someplace wonderful rather than a battlefield where we would both inevitably get hurt. "Let's go see Grandma and Grandpa." Lily nodded, clutching her tin of cookies like a shield, and I recognized the expression on her small face because I had seen it in the mirror my entire life. Hope mixed with fear, the desperate wish to please mixed with the knowledge that nothing we did would ever be quite enough. We walked up the stone path together, past the rose bushes my mother had planted 20 years ago, and tended with more care than she had ever shown me, past the garden. Gnomes my father thought were charming and I thought were creepy past all. The markers of a childhood that had looked normal from the outside but had hollowed me out from the inside. Lily's hand found mine small and trusting, and I squeezed it gently, trying to transmit courage I did not feel. I would protect her, I promised myself. I would make sure she had a better experience here than I ever had. I would stand between her and their cruelty, absorb the blows meant for her, perform the role of dutiful daughter and doting mother so well that they would have no choice but to be kind. I was so naive then. I believed that my goodness could redeem their badness, that my sacrifice could purchase their love, that if I just tried hard enough and stayed silent enough and made myself small enough, I could keep my daughter safe while maintaining some threadbare connection to the only family I had ever known. I pushed open the front door without knocking because this had once been my home, because I still could not quite accept that I was now a visitor in a place where I had never really belonged. The voices became immediately clearer, no longer muffled by walls but sharp and present, filling the foyer where I had taken prom photos and posed for Christmas cards, and learned that smiling for cameras was easier than dealing with what happened when the cameras turned off. Victoria stood in the living room like she owned it, which in many ways she did. Her designer handbag, worth more than my monthly rent, hung carelessly from one shoulder. Her perfectly manicured fingernails, painted in some trendy color I could not afford, pointed accusingly at our father, who sat in his recliner, looking both annoyed and resigned. My mother hovered nearby, hands twisting together in that nervous gesture I had inherited, her eyes darting between her two daughters, as if calculating which one deserved her loyalty today, though we both knew the answer. The scene was so familiar, it was almost comforting in its predictability. This was the dynamic I had grown up in, the family system where Victoria demanded and received, where I asked for nothing and got less, where our parents enabled and excused and pretended that this was how loving families functioned. My sister's voice carried that particular sharp edge I had learned to fear as a child, the tone that meant someone was about to be verbally eviscerated, the warning sign that preceded her worst cruelties. She was demanding money again. Another investment opportunity, another business venture that absolutely could not fail. My father sat in his recliner, the television blaring a football game behind him, barely looking at her as he muttered something about already giving her enough this month. My mother immediately jumped to Victoria's defense, explaining how important this opportunity was, how it could really take her career to the next level. I stood frozen in the doorway, Lily's small hand gripping mine tightly. Victoria turned and saw us then. Her expression shifted from anger to something worse, that predatory smile she wore when she sensed weakness. She looked us up and down with those calculating eyes, taking in Lily's homemade cookies and carefully chosen dress. The silence stretched for a moment before she spoke. Her words cut through the room like a knife. She told me Lily looked like a wax figure that had just stepped out of some dusty old museum. Then she turned her attention to me, her voice dripping with condescension as she commented on my outdated style, my dedication to being a proper housewife in an age where women should be building empires. She called me her little sister in that patronizing tone that made me feel 12 years old again. She reminded me that the world kept moving, implying that I had been left behind. My mother forced a laugh, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. My father didn't even look away from the television screen. I swallowed the familiar taste of humiliation and guided Lily further into the house. We had driven an hour to be here. We had baked cookies. Lily had been so excited to see her grandparents. I would not let Victoria's cruelty ruin this for my daughter, even though every word felt like a physical blow. I had become an expert at absorbing pain, at smoothing over uncomfortable moments, at pretending everything was fine. It was what I had been doing my entire life. Lunch was unbearable. We sat around the dining table that had hosted countless family meals, but nothing about this felt like the warm gatherings I remembered from my childhood. Those memories, I was beginning to realize, might have been a fantasy I created to cope with a reality that was always this cold. Victoria dominated the conversation, her voice filling every corner of the room as she bragged about her latest advertising contracts, the brands that were desperate to work with her, the influencer events she had been invited to. She showed everyone photos on her phone, swiping through images of herself in designer clothes at exclusive parties, living a life that seemed to exist in a completely different universe from mine. Then she turned her attention back to me. She talked about how sad it must be for me, stuck at home with a child invisible to the world. She brought up my divorce with fake sympathy, making sure everyone remembered that I was a single mother, that I had failed at marriage. She wondered aloud what kind of example I was setting for Lily, raising her without a father figure, without showing her what a successful woman looked like in the modern world. My mother nodded along at some points, adding comments about how she worried about Lily's future. My father continued eating, occasionally grunting in agreement. The worst part came when Victoria leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Lily with something that looked almost like malice. She said what a pity it was for my daughter growing up without knowing what a real father was like. Lily's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tight. She was only 7 years old, but she understood enough to know she was being attacked. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and suffocating, but I pushed it down. I had always pushed it down. I told myself I was being the bigger person that Lily needed to see how to handle difficult people with grace, that family was important even when they hurt you. After lunch, we moved back to the living room. My mother brought out tea, bustling around with her best china, the set she only used for special occasions. Victoria had requested a specific fruit tea, something exotic she had discovered on one of her trips. She made a show of preparing it herself, boiling water in the kitchen, steeping the tea in a delicate pot, pouring it into one of the antique cups my mother treasured. She placed the cup on the edge of the coffee table right where anyone walking by might bump into it and continued her monologue about her fabulous life. Lily had been so quiet throughout all of this. She sat next to me on the couch, her cookies untouched on the table, her dress wrinkled from gripping the fabric nervously. When she finally got up, asking if she could use the bathroom, I felt relieved. A few minutes of peace for her away from Victoria's toxic presence. But as she came back, trying to squeeze between the coffee table and the couch, where Victoria had sprawled dramatically, her elbow caught the edge of the teacup. Time seemed to slow down. The cup tipped hot tea splashing across the table and onto Victoria's designer jeans. It was just tea. Just a small accident. But Victoria's face transformed into something ugly and terrifying. She lunged forward with a speed that shocked me, her mouth twisted as she screamed words no adult should ever say to a child. She called Lily vile names, words that made my mother gasp and my father finally look up from his television. Before I could move, before I could process what was happening, Victoria was on her feet and moving toward the kitchen. The kettle was still on the stove, still hot from when she had boiled water for her tea. She grabbed it without hesitation, without a second thought, and in one fluid motion, she threw the scalding contents directly at my daughter. Lily's scream tore through my soul. I watched in horror as the boiling water hit her arm and shoulder, watched her small body crumple as the pain registered. The smell of burning skin filled the air. Red welts appeared instantly on her pale skin, blistering before my eyes. I was moving, then throwing myself between Victoria and my daughter, scooping Lily into my arms as she sobbed and screamed. My sister stood there with the empty kettle still in her hand, her face flushed with anger, showing no remorse whatsoever. I screamed at her, my voice raw with fury and disbelief. I asked if she had lost her mind, if she understood what she had just done. But before Victoria could respond, my mother was there pushing past me to get to my sister. Not to check on Lily, not to see if my daughter was okay, but to comfort Victoria, to make sure Victoria was not too upset. My mother's voice was shaking as she told me that Victoria just had a temper, that she had not meant it, that these things happened. She turned to Lily, still crying in my arms with angry red burns spreading across her skin, and told her not to make such a fuss, not to be so dramatic. My father finally stood up, but only to mutter something about children needing to learn discipline, about how kids these days got away with too much. He looked at Lily with more annoyance than concern, as if her pain was inconveniencing his Sunday afternoon football game. Something inside me broke in that moment. Not broke like it had broken before when I could piece it back together and keep going. This was different. This was final. I looked at my mother cradling Victoria, at my father already turning back to his television, at my sister who had just assaulted my child and showed no remorse. I looked at Lily's tear-stained face, at the burns already blistering on her delicate skin, and I made a decision. I did not say a word. I wrapped Lily carefully in my jacket, cradled her against my chest, and walked toward the door. My mother called after me, her voice high and anxious, telling me not to be so sensitive, that we needed to talk about this like adults. Victoria said something mocking about me always being overdramatic. My father said nothing at all. I kept walking. The door slammed behind us with a finality that echoed in my bones. In the car, Lily sobbed against my shoulder as I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands. I called 911 first, my voice surprisingly steady, as I explained that my daughter had been deliberately burned with boiling water and needed immediate medical attention. The dispatcher kept me on the line, asking questions, guiding me to the nearest emergency room. I drove faster than I ever had in my life, one hand on the wheel and one hand holding Lily's uninjured hand, whispering promises that everything would be okay, that I would never let anyone hurt her again. The emergency room was a blur of harsh lights and urgent voices. Doctors and nurses swarmed around Lily, carefully examining her burns, asking questions about what happened. I told them the truth, every detail, while a nurse documented everything. The attending physician, a kind woman with gray streaks in her hair, told me Lily had second-degree burns that would require treatment and careful monitoring. She said my daughter was lucky, it was not worse, but the way she looked at me made it clear she understood this was not an accident. She asked if I wanted to speak to a social worker. I said yes. While Lily was being treated, sedated slightly to manage the pain, I sat in a quiet hallway and called Marcus. He had been my colleague years ago when I worked for a nonprofit organization that supported domestic violence survivors. We had stayed in touch sporadically over the years, exchanging holiday cards and occasional messages. When he answered, hearing my voice shaking as I explained what had happened, he did not hesitate. He told me he would be there within the hour, that I should not speak to anyone else without him present, that we would handle this together. Marcus arrived just as the police did. Detective Miller was a middle-aged man with tired eyes who listened to my story with a skeptical expression that made my stomach churn. He took photos of Lily's burns, interviewed the hospital staff, and took my statement. But I could feel his doubt. When I mentioned that my sister was Victoria Chen, the influencer with over 2 million followers, something shifted in his expression. He asked if there was any chance this was a misunderstanding, if perhaps Lily had accidentally caused the water to spill on herself. I felt my control slipping, but Marcus stepped in smoothly, his lawyer voice calm and firm as he explained exactly what had happened and what we expected the police to do about it. Over the next few days, while Lily recovered at home with carefully bandaged burns that required constant attention, my family began their campaign. The calls started within hours of us leaving the hospital. Victoria first, her voice saccharine sweet as she apologized for losing her temper but insisted I was blowing everything out of proportion. When I hung up on her, my mother called crying about how I was tearing the family apart, about how we needed to work this out privately. My father sent terse text messages about not embarrassing the family by involving the police. Then the messages turned ugly. Victoria sent texts calling me ungrateful, saying I had always been jealous of her success, accusing me of using Lily to destroy her career. My mother left voicemails begging me to think about what this would do to Victoria's reputation, to the family name. They sent emails, they showed up at my apartment building, they tried everything to make me withdraw my police report. Marcus helped me document everything, saving every message, recording phone calls where legally permitted, building a case that went far beyond just the assault. What they did not know was that I had already started my own investigation. I had always been good with research, with digging into details, with understanding how systems worked. That was what I had done at the nonprofit, helping women navigate legal systems and find resources. Now I used those same skills for my own daughter. I discovered that Victoria had recently signed a major contract with a prestigious cosmetics company, a deal worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that would launch her into a new tier of influencer stardom. The company prided itself on family values and supporting women and children. I compiled everything. Photos of Lily's burns taken from multiple angles and properly documented, medical reports from the emergency room, detailed descriptions of second-degree burns and the treatment required. A statement from Lily's therapist, whom we had started seeing immediately, about the psychological trauma my daughter was experiencing. Recordings of Victoria and my parents threatening me, demanding I drop the charges, calling me terrible names. I put it all together in a comprehensive file and sent it to the legal department of the cosmetics company, along with a carefully worded letter explaining that I thought they should know about the character of the woman representing their brand. The response was swift and brutal. Within 2 days, the company announced they were terminating their contract with Victoria Chen, citing violations of their ethics clause. They released a public statement condemning violence against children and stating that they could not be associated with anyone who engaged in such behavior. The story was picked up by entertainment news outlets, by mommy bloggers, by social media accounts that loved a good scandal. Victoria's perfectly curated image began to crumble. Her follower count dropped by hundreds of thousands within a week. Other brands began quietly distancing themselves, canceling contracts, or choosing not to renew them. Victoria's phone call came at 2 a.m. She was screaming incoherent with rage, accusing me of destroying her life, of ruining everything she had built. I let her rant for a full minute before I spoke, my voice colder than I had ever heard it. I told her this was just the beginning, that she had hurt my daughter and I would never forgive, that every consequence she faced was earned. She threatened to sue me, to take everything I had. I laughed, a sound that surprised even me, and told her to try. Then I hung up and blocked her number. But Victoria and my parents were not done. With the help of my sister's fiancé's lawyer, a man who specialized in family law and had connections throughout the court system, they filed for custody of Lily. The documents arrived via courier, official and terrifying, claiming that I was mentally unstable, that I was alienating Lily from her family, that my daughter would be better off with her grandparents who could provide a stable two-parent household. They cited my divorce, my modest income, my lack of a support system. They painted me as a bitter woman using her child as a weapon. Marcus read through the filing with a grim expression. He told me this was serious, that we needed to build an airtight case, that family court could be unpredictable. We spent weeks preparing. We gathered Lily's medical records, documentation of her therapy sessions, where she talked about her fear of Victoria, of how she had nightmares about being burned again. We collected character references from Lily's teachers, from neighbors, from the parents of her friends. We documented every threatening message from my family, every attempt to manipulate or intimidate me into silence. And I made another decision, one I had been considering for years but never had the courage to execute. I had money in my family's investment fund, an inheritance from my grandmother that my father managed. It was not a fortune, but it was substantial. My parents had always treated it as their money-making decisions about investments, without consulting me, using the returns to fund their lifestyle. They had recently put a deposit on a luxury retirement community, one of those places with golf courses and spa services and astronomical monthly fees. I called the fund manager, verified that the money was legally mine, and withdrew every cent. Without that capital, my parents could not afford their retirement dream. They would have to stay in their current house, live on their actual retirement income, face the reality of their financial situation. The court date arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. The courthouse was an imposing building downtown, all stone and marble and echoing hallways. I wore a simple navy dress, minimal makeup, my hair pulled back in a neat bun. I wanted to look responsible, maternal, nothing like the unstable woman they had described in their filing. Lily stayed with a trusted friend, spared from having to be present for this part of the battle, though we knew she might need to testify later. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal. Victoria sat on the opposite side with my parents, all three of them dressed expensively, projecting an image of respectability and wealth. My sister wore a demure outfit, probably chosen by her lawyer, her makeup subtle in a way that was completely unlike her usual dramatic style. She looked like a concerned aunt worried about her niece's well-being. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the distraught grandmother. My father sat stoic and stern, the patriarch trying to do what was right for his granddaughter. Their lawyer was smooth and professional, painting a picture of a loving family torn apart by one member's mental breakdown. He talked about how Victoria had simply reacted in the heat of the moment to a child's misbehavior, how the incident had been blown out of proportion, how I had weaponized the situation to hurt my sister out of jealousy. He presented my divorce as evidence of instability, my withdrawal from the family fund as proof of vindictiveness, my modest income as a sign that I could not provide for Lily the way they could. My mother testified about how worried she was about Lily, about how I had always been the difficult child prone to overreaction and drama. Victoria took the stand and performed beautifully, tears streaming down her face as she talked about how much she loved her niece, how the accident had been just that, an accident, how devastated she was that I would not let her apologize properly. Then it was our turn. Marcus was methodical and thorough. He presented the medical evidence first, letting the photos of Lily's burns speak for themselves. He showed the pattern of the injuries, inconsistent with an accidental spill, consistent with water being thrown with force. He called the emergency room doctor to testify about the severity of the burns and the likelihood that they were inflicted intentionally. He played recordings of Victoria and my parents threatening me, their voices filled with anger and manipulation rather than concern for a child's welfare. He showed the pattern of financial control my parents had exerted over me for years, the way they had treated my inheritance as their own until I finally claimed it. But the most powerful moment came when Lily testified. Marcus had prepared her carefully, working with her therapist to make sure she was ready, that she understood she only had to tell the truth. She was so small in the witness box, her feet barely touching the floor, but her voice was clear and steady. She described that Sunday afternoon, the way Victoria had been mean all day, the way she had felt scared and confused. She talked about the moment the tea spilled, how it was an accident, how she had tried to say sorry. Then she described Victoria grabbing the kettle, the look on her aunt's face, the pain when the hot water hit her skin. She showed the court her scars still pink and healing, a permanent reminder of that day. She answered the lawyer's questions about her grandparents, about how they had comforted Victoria instead of her, how Grandma had told her not to make a fuss, how Grandpa had said she needed discipline. She talked about her nightmares, about being afraid of hot water now, about not wanting to see Aunt Victoria ever again. When the opposing lawyer tried to cross-examine her, suggesting that maybe she had misremembered or was confused, Lily looked him straight in the eye and said no, she remembered perfectly, because how could anyone forget something like that? Marcus had saved his best evidence for last. He produced a video, grainy but clear enough, from a neighbor's security camera that had a partial view through our parents' front window. The angle was not perfect, but you could see figures moving, could see the moment Victoria grabbed something from the stove, could see the deliberate throwing motion, could see a small figure crumpling. Then he played an audio recording, something I had not even known he had obtained. Victoria talking to a friend on the phone, her voice captured through some legal means. I did not fully understand, admitting that she had meant to teach Lily a lesson about respect, that the brat needed to learn not to mess with her things, that she had not expected such a big reaction to a little hot water. The courtroom went silent. My mother's face went white. My father's jaw clenched. Victoria looked like she might be sick. Their lawyer tried to object, tried to question the legality of the evidence, but Marcus was ready with precedents and documentation. Everything had been obtained properly. Everything was admissible. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had been watching everything with an unreadable expression, called for a brief recess. When we returned, her decision was swift and unequivocal. She denied the custody petition completely, finding no merit to any of the claims against me. She issued a permanent restraining order against Victoria, prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of Lily or me. She issued a stern warning to my parents about their role in enabling and excusing violence against a child, noting that while she could not prohibit them from seeing their granddaughter, any future custody attempts would be viewed with extreme skepticism given their behavior. She also ordered that all parties undergo family therapy, though she made it clear she had little hope for reconciliation given what she had heard. Outside the courthouse, Marcus hugged me while I cried tears of relief and exhaustion and grief for the family I had thought I had. He told me I had been incredibly brave, that Lily was lucky to have me as her mother, that we had won. But it did not feel like winning. It felt like surviving. The fallout was spectacular. The trial had been public record, and within days, journalists had picked up the story. One of the major women's magazines ran an investigative piece about Victoria Chen interviewing other people she had hurt over the years, former friends and business partners who came forward now that someone had stood up to her. They detailed a pattern of bullying, manipulation, and cruelty that had been hidden behind her curated online persona. Her remaining sponsorships evaporated. Her social media accounts, once her kingdom, became graveyards as followers abandoned her in droves. Brands that had once courted her now wanted nothing to do with her name. Her fiancé broke off their engagement in a very public statement, saying he could not marry someone capable of such cruelty, especially toward a child. The story dominated entertainment news for weeks, a cautionary tale about influencer culture and the darkness that could hide behind a pretty Instagram feed. Victoria's accounts eventually went dark entirely, either deleted or abandoned, her carefully constructed empire reduced to rubble. My parents came to my apartment 3 weeks after the trial. They looked older, somehow diminished. My mother's makeup could not hide the dark circles under her eyes. My father's shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. They asked to talk, and against my better judgment, I let them in. But I did not let them see Lily, who was at a friend's house, having a play date, laughing and drawing pictures, slowly healing. They tried to apologize, but their words were hollow and conditional. They were sorry that things had gotten so out of hand, sorry that I had felt the need to take such drastic action, sorry that the family was broken. But they were not sorry for what they had done. My mother cried about Victoria, about how hard my sister was taking, everything about how her life was ruined. She suggested that maybe given some time we could all work toward forgiveness and healing. My father talked about family loyalty, about how blood was thicker than water, about how I should consider the position I had put them in by withdrawing my money and forcing them to cancel their retirement plans. I let them finish. I listened to every word, watched them perform the roles they had always played, the concerned parents who just wanted peace. Then I spoke, and my voice was calm and clear and final. I told them I had spent my entire life making excuses for them, absorbing their neglect and criticism, believing that if I just tried harder, sacrificed more was better, somehow they would love me the way I needed. I told them that for years I had thought silence was survival, that keeping the peace was the same as being strong. But I understood now that silence was just another way of enabling cruelty, of allowing abuse to continue unchecked. I told them they had chosen Victoria over me and over their granddaughter, not just once, but over and over again throughout our lives. They had called deliberately hurting a child with boiling water, just losing her temper, just being passionate, just an accident. They had prioritized their status and their money and their favorite daughter over the safety of an innocent child. I told them I did not need their forgiveness because they had already lost mine permanently and irrevocably. I told them I had learned to use my voice finally after decades of choking on words I was too afraid to say. And I was teaching Lily to use hers too, teaching her that she never had to accept cruelty or abuse or neglect in the name of family, that she was worth protecting, that her pain mattered. I walked to my apartment door and opened it, a clear dismissal. My mother tried to speak, reaching for me, but I stepped back. My father's face hardened with anger, that familiar expression that used to make me shrink and apologize. This time I felt nothing but pity. They left, and I closed the door behind them, turning the deadbolt with a satisfying click. I never saw them again. They tried to contact me a few more times, emails and letters that went unanswered, attempts at showing up that were thwarted by my building's security and the restraining order that I eventually extended to include them after they would not respect my boundaries. Eventually, the attempts stopped. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they had sold their house and moved to a modest retirement community in Florida, far from the luxury they had planned. Victoria had moved in with them after losing her apartment, unable to find work, burning through what money she had left. They formed their own small, bitter unit, blaming me for their circumstances rather than accepting responsibility for their choices. Meanwhile, Lily and I began to heal. The burns on her arm and shoulder slowly faded from angry red to pink to pale silver lines that would always be there but no longer hurt. The nightmares decreased with therapy and time and patience. She started smiling more, laughing freely, showing me drawings of bright futures and safe places. She wrote a poem for a school assignment about the strength it takes to speak up when you are scared, about how scars can be proof that you survived something hard and came out stronger. Her teacher called me in for a conference, concerned at first, but ended up telling me that Lily was one of the most resilient children she had ever met, that whatever I was doing was working. For me, the healing was slower and more complicated. I had to unlearn years of conditioning, years of believing my worth was tied to how much I could endure, how well I could smooth over conflicts, how invisible I could make my own needs. I went to therapy too, working through the grief of losing my family of origin while trying to build something new. I reconnected with old friends I had let drift away during my marriage and its aftermath, women who reminded me that I was more than just Lily's mother, more than just Victoria's disappointing sister, more than just my parents' forgotten daughter. And I started the Quiet Flame Project. It began small, just me and a lawyer friend and a therapist who donated their time helping a few women navigate the legal system after leaving abusive situations. But it grew. We got a small grant, then a larger one. We attracted volunteers, professionals who had their own stories of survival and wanted to help others. We provided legal support, therapy, referrals, financial planning, help, and temporary housing assistance to single mothers escaping domestic violence or toxic family situations. We focused especially on helping women who, like me, had been made to feel that their only value was in how much they could sacrifice, who had been conditioned to believe that speaking up was selfish. The local news did a story about us 6 months after we officially incorporated as a nonprofit. Then a national women's magazine picked it up, drawn by the connection to the Victoria Chen scandal that had captivated the internet. They interviewed me and I told my story fully for the first time publicly, not hiding behind privacy or shame. I talked about growing up as the overlooked daughter, about my sister's cruelty that was always excused as passion, about my parents enabling that I had mistaken for peacekeeping, about the moment my daughter was burned, and something in me finally broke free. The response was overwhelming. Women from across the country reached out sharing their own stories of family abuse and manipulation of partners who hurt them, of systems that failed to protect them. Donations poured in. We were able to hire staff, open an office, expand our services. I found myself speaking at conferences about breaking cycles of abuse, about teaching children to recognize their own worth, about the particular insidiousness of family violence that is dismissed as just how some families are. Lily came with me to some of these events when appropriate. She was 9 by then, confident and articulate, and she wanted to share her story too. She told audiences about the day her aunt burned her, about being scared, but finding her voice, about learning that family should make you feel safe, not afraid. She held up her arm, showing the scars that had become part of her story rather than something to hide, and she told people that these marks reminded her that she was strong enough to survive hard things. There was rarely a dry eye in the room when she finished speaking. One evening, almost 2 years after that terrible Sunday, Lily and I were curled up on our couch watching television, a rare, quiet moment in our busy lives. A local news broadcast came on and the anchor mentioned Victoria Chen's name. I almost changed the channel, not wanting to invite that darkness into our peaceful space, but Lily asked to watch. The segment was brief, an update on various local personalities. There was footage of Victoria looking haggard and worn, her hair dull, her clothes plain and ill-fitting, leaving some kind of court-ordered anger management program. The reporter mentioned bankruptcy, ongoing legal troubles, and a complete fall from grace. Lily watched silently, her hand resting on my arm. When the segment ended and moved on to weather, she turned to me with those serious brown eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. She said she was not scared of Victoria anymore, not even a little bit. I asked her how she felt about seeing her aunt like that, expecting maybe some satisfaction or residual anger. Instead, Lily thought for a moment and said she felt sorry for Victoria because her aunt had spent so much time trying to hurt people that she forgot how to be happy, and now she had nothing at all. The wisdom in my daughter's words made my throat tight. I pulled her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. I told her I was proud of her kindness, even towards someone who had hurt her, of her ability to feel compassion without letting it make her vulnerable to more harm. She snuggled against me and said she learned that from me, that I had taught her it was possible to be strong and kind at the same time, to protect yourself while still being a good person. We sat there as the television flickered, as the world continued turning outside our window, as the life we had built together surrounded us with its warmth and safety. I thought about the woman I had been 2 years ago, swallowing anger and hurt, believing that endurance was the same as strength, terrified of disrupting the fragile peace I thought was holding my world together. I thought about how close I had come to teaching Lily those same lessons, to showing her that love meant accepting cruelty, that family meant sacrificing your well-being, that speaking up was worse than suffering in silence. Instead, I had learned to use my voice, and in doing so I had found it, not just in the legal battles or the nonprofit work or the public speaking, but in the small moments too. In saying no without guilt, in setting boundaries without apologizing and teaching Lily that her needs mattered as much as anyone else's, in building a life based on what brought us joy, rather than what kept others comfortable. The quiet flame inside me, the one I had spent so many years trying to extinguish to avoid burning anyone else, had been allowed to grow. It provided warmth now instead of destruction, light instead of smoke, strength instead of the ashes of my self-worth. Our apartment was small but bright, decorated with Lily's artwork and photos of the two of us, of the friends we had made, of the family we had chosen. We had routines and traditions that were ours alone, built from scratch without the weight of generational dysfunction. We had game nights and movie marathons and Sunday morning pancakes shaped like hearts. We had hard conversations about Lily's feelings, about her grandparents, about the complicated grief of losing family members who were still alive, about how love should feel, and the importance of trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. We had also begun to build something larger than just the two of us. The Quiet Flame Project had helped over 300 women in its first 18 months, providing resources that ranged from legal representation to job training to emergency housing. We had a dedicated team of volunteers and staff who shared our mission, many of them survivors themselves, who had found purpose in helping others escape situations they understood intimately. We had partnered with domestic violence shelters, legal aid organizations, and therapy practices to create a comprehensive support network. I had discovered that I was good at this work, maybe better than I had been at anything else in my life. The skills I had developed in survival, reading people, navigating complex emotional situations, understanding systems, and finding loopholes, all of it translated into being able to help others find their way out of darkness. And there was something healing in using my pain to prevent others from suffering the same way, in transforming my worst experiences into something that could protect and empower others. Marcus had become not just our lawyer, but one of our closest friends. He volunteered countless hours for the Quiet Flame Project, taking on cases pro bono, training other lawyers in family law tactics that protected vulnerable mothers and children. He had dinner at our apartment at least once a week, usually bringing takeout and board games that had Lily squealing with laughter. He was the kind of male presence I wanted in my daughter's life, someone who showed her that men could be gentle and supportive, that masculinity did not require dominance or control. On the second anniversary of that Sunday, I took Lily back to the hospital where we had spent that terrible first night. But this time, we were not patients. We were visitors bringing donations of books and toys for the pediatric ward, specifically for the burn unit. Lily had insisted on this, wanting to do something for other kids who were scared and hurting. She walked those halls with her head high, her scars visible on her arm, where her short-sleeved shirt did not cover them, and she talked to children who were going through their own painful recoveries. She told them it would get better, that the scars would fade, that they were brave and strong. The nurses remembered us. They hugged me and told me how proud they were of what we had built, how they had been following the Quiet Flame Project's work, how they had referred several mothers to our services. The doctor who had treated Lily that first night, Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Victoria despite the shared last name, pulled me aside and told me something I would never forget. She said she saw hundreds of children in that emergency room, victims of accidents and abuse and the casual cruelties of the world. She said most of their parents were doing their best, trying to protect their kids while dealing with their own trauma and limitations. But she said she could always tell the difference between parents who would break the cycle and those who would perpetuate it. She had known, watching me that night with Lily, that I was the former. She had seen it in the way I held my daughter, in the fury in my eyes, directed not at Lily for causing trouble, but at the person who had hurt her, in my immediate willingness to involve authorities, even though it meant implicating my own family. Her words meant more to me than any award or recognition ever could. Because the greatest fear I carried even 2 years later, even with all the therapy and growth and success, was that I might somehow damage Lily the way I had been damaged. That I might pass on the dysfunction I had absorbed, might teach her the wrong lessons about love and sacrifice and worth. Dr. Chen assured me that was not happening, that Lily was thriving, specifically because I had chosen to break the pattern, to demand better, to show her that safety and respect were not too much to ask for. We left the hospital as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of fire and rebirth. Lily held my hand, swinging our joined arms between us, chattering about wanting ice cream for dinner since it was a special day. I agreed easily, no longer worried about being the perfect parent who enforced all the rules. I had learned that being a good mother meant being present and loving and protective, not performing some impossible standard of perfection. At the ice cream shop, a small family-owned place we frequented, the owner greeted us warmly. She was an older woman who had immigrated from Italy decades ago, who made the most incredible gelato and always gave Lily extra sprinkles. She asked about the Quiet Flame Project, mentioning that her niece had used our services after leaving an abusive marriage. She hugged me tightly, pressing a kiss to both my cheeks in the Italian way, and told me I was doing God's work. I felt uncomfortable with the praise, as I always did, but I accepted it graciously. I was learning that too, how to receive kindness without deflecting, how to acknowledge my accomplishments without minimizing them. We ate our ice cream at a small table by the window, watching people walk by in the warm evening air. Lily told me about school, about a project she was working on about heroes. She had chosen to write about me, she said matter-of-factly, because I had taught her that real heroes were not people with superpowers who saved the world. Real heroes were people who protected the ones they loved, who spoke up when something was wrong, who helped others even when it was hard. She asked if I would help her with the project, if I would tell her more stories about starting the Quiet Flame Project and helping other moms and kids. I agreed, my heart so full it ached. I asked her if she ever missed her grandparents, her aunt, the family gatherings we no longer attended. She considered this seriously, as she did most questions. She said sometimes she felt sad about it, especially during holidays when other kids talked about their extended families. But then she remembered how scared she used to feel around them, how small and wrong they made her feel, how Grandma and Grandpa never really listened when she talked, how Aunt Victoria was always mean. She said our family now, just the two of us, plus Marcus and our friends, felt better. She said she would rather have a small family that was kind than a big family that was mean. Her clarity about this, her ability to articulate complex emotional truths, constantly amazed me. I knew it was partly because we talked about everything, because I had made a conscious choice to be honest with her in age-appropriate ways about what had happened and why. I had not hidden behind euphemisms or false explanations. I had not told her that family was everything, and we had to forgive no matter what. Instead, I had taught her about boundaries and respect, and the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, about how you could release anger without allowing someone back into your life to hurt you again. As we walked home that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. He was forwarding me an article from a major national newspaper about the rise in family estrangement cases and the factors that led to adult children cutting off their parents. The article cited research, interviewed therapists, and included personal stories. Near the end, there was a mention of the Quiet Flame Project as an example of resources available for people navigating these difficult decisions, particularly when abuse or enabling abuse was involved. The article linked to our website. Marcus added a message saying our server might crash from the traffic surge, that he hoped we were ready for an influx of calls and emails. He was right. By the time we got home, my work phone had 17 new voicemails, and my email was flooded with messages. Women thanking me for speaking up, sharing their own stories of family trauma, asking for help or resources, or just someone who understood. Some of the messages were heartbreaking, detailing abuse that made what I had experienced seem mild in comparison. Others were hopeful, from women who had already left toxic situations and were building new lives and wanted to tell me it was possible. I spent that evening after Lily went to bed, responding to as many messages as I could, connecting people with resources, offering encouragement and validation. This had become part of my routine these late-night hours, when I did the quieter work of one-on-one connection that complemented the organizational leadership. It was exhausting but purposeful in a way nothing else in my life had ever been. Around midnight, a new email came through with a subject line that made my breath catch. It was from Victoria. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won. The message was long and rambling, clearly written in some kind of emotional state. She talked about how unfair everything had been, how I had destroyed her life over one mistake, how she had lost everything because I could not forgive. She said our parents were miserable, that they barely spoke to each other anymore, that they blamed themselves for how things had turned out. She said she was in therapy now, working on her anger issues, that she had been diagnosed with several personality disorders she was trying to manage. She said she wanted to apologize, that she understood now what she had done to Lily was wrong, that the hot water could have caused permanent damage or even killed my daughter if it had hit her face or chest. She said she had been so focused on herself, on her image and success and being the favorite, that she had lost sight of basic human decency. She asked if there was any path to reconciliation, any way I could find it in my heart to forgive her, any possibility of rebuilding some kind of relationship. The email ended with a plea for me to respond, to at least acknowledge that she was trying to change, to give her a chance to prove she could be different. She said she thought about Lily constantly, about what she had stolen from her niece, about how she would never forgive herself, even if I could not forgive her either. I read the email 3 times, looking for manipulation, for the hidden agenda, for the guilt trip, or the veiled threat. But it seemed genuine, or as genuine as Victoria was capable of being. She sounded broken and lost, and part of me, the part that had spent my whole life trying to fix things and make peace, wanted to respond with comfort and encouragement. But I had learned better. I had learned that not every apology deserved acceptance, that remorse did not obligate forgiveness, that my healing was not dependent on helping the person who hurt me feel better about what they had done. I sat with the email for a long time, feeling the weight of the decision. Then I moved it to a folder I had created for communications from my family, marked it as read, and closed my laptop. I did not respond. Perhaps someday I would if Victoria truly changed over years rather than months, if she demonstrated through actions rather than words that she had become someone different. But that was not a decision I needed to make tonight or tomorrow or even next year. I had given enough of my life to managing Victoria's emotions and protecting her from the consequences of her choices. My energy belonged to Lily, now to myself, to the women we were helping through the Quiet Flame project. In the morning, Lily woke me up by bouncing on my bed, her hair tangled from sleep and her face bright with excitement. It was Saturday, and we had plans to go to the farmer's market then, to visit one of the women from our program who had just moved into her own apartment after leaving an abusive marriage. Lily had made a welcome basket with her own allowance money, filling it with small kitchen items and a plant and a card she had drawn. This was what our lives looked like now, filled with purpose and connection and the kind of richness that had nothing to do with money or status or Instagram followers. At the farmer's market, we ran into people we knew, women from the program, who had completed our services and were thriving volunteers who helped with various aspects of the organization, local business owners who supported our work. Each conversation was warm and genuine, filled with updates and laughter and the easy comfort of community. This was the family I had built, chosen rather than assigned, based on mutual respect and support rather than blood obligation. The woman we visited, Jennifer, cried when she saw the welcome basket. Her apartment was small but clean and bright, decorated with secondhand furniture and hope. She had her 2 children with her, a boy and a girl around Lily's age, and they immediately started playing together while Jennifer and I talked. She told me about her new job, about the relief of not waking up afraid every morning, about the therapy that was helping her process years of trauma. She thanked me over and over for the Quiet Flame project, for the legal help that had kept her safe during the divorce, for the financial planning that had helped her understand she could survive on her own, for the belief that she deserved better. I told her what I told every woman we worked with, that she had done the hard part herself. We had just provided tools and resources. She had found the courage to leave, to fight for her children, to build a new life from nothing. She was the hero of her own story, not me. But she shook her head and insisted we were heroes together, that sometimes people needed someone to believe in them before they could believe in themselves. On the drive home, Lily asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. I laughed at the question, pointing out that I was already grown up. She rolled her eyes in that way only a 9-year-old could, and clarified that she meant, what did I want to do next? What were my big dreams? I thought about it, considering seriously, because Lily always deserved serious answers to her questions. I told her I wanted the Quiet Flame project to expand nationwide, to have offices in every state so that no woman had to navigate the aftermath of abuse alone. I wanted to create training programs for lawyers and therapists and social workers so they better understood the dynamics of family estrangement and enabled abuse. I wanted to work toward policy changes that protected children and vulnerable adults, that recognized emotional and financial abuse as seriously as physical violence. I wanted to write a book about our story, not for fame or attention, but so other people in similar situations would know they were not alone, that there was a path forward. But more than any of that, I told her I wanted to continue being her mom and watching her grow into whoever she was going to become. I wanted to keep having ice cream for dinner on special days, and Saturday morning farmers market trips and game nights with Marcus. I wanted to keep building a life based on joy and purpose rather than fear and obligation. I wanted to keep learning and growing and becoming more fully myself. Lily nodded thoughtfully and said those all sounded like good dreams. Then she announced her own dreams, a mix of wanting to be an artist and a scientist and someone who helped kids like Aunt Victoria had hurt. She said maybe she could work at the Quiet Flame project when she was old enough, or maybe she would start her own organization for kids specifically. She had it all planned out, confident in that way children were before the world taught them to doubt themselves. I made a silent promise then to never let anyone steal that confidence from her, to protect the bright certainty in her voice when she talked about her future. I had failed at many things in my life, made countless mistakes, stayed too long in situations that harmed me, accepted treatment I never should have tolerated. But I had succeeded at this, at giving my daughter the foundation I had never had, at teaching her that her voice mattered and her needs were valid and no one had the right to diminish her light. That night, after dinner and homework and the usual bedtime routine, I tucked Lily into her bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and art supplies and books. She asked me to tell her a story, and instead of reading from one of the books on her shelf, I told her our story. Not the traumatic parts, not the details that would give her nightmares, but the story of how we had been scared and hurt but had chosen to be brave, how we had lost one family but built another, how we had taken something painful and turned it into something that helped people. I told her about the Quiet Flame, the metaphor that had inspired our organization's name. How a quiet flame did not roar and consume like wildfire but burned steady and true, providing warmth and light without destroying everything around it. How I had learned to tend my own flame, to let it grow without fear, to use it to illuminate dark places, rather than hiding it away in fear of burning someone. Lily listened with sleepy eyes, her small hand holding mine, her breathing gradually slowing as she drifted toward sleep. Just before she fully surrendered to dreams, she murmured that she loved our story, that she wanted to tell it to other kids someday, that she was proud of me. Then she was asleep, peaceful and safe, her scars hidden beneath her nightgown, but no longer defining her. I sat there in the dim glow of her nightlight for a long time, watching her sleep, marveling at the resilience of children, at the capacity for healing when given space and support and unconditional love. I thought about the woman I had been before that terrible Sunday, how small I had made myself, how much I had endured in the name of keeping peace, how close I had come to teaching my daughter those same destructive lessons. I thought about Victoria, broken and alone, somewhere living with the consequences of her choices. I thought about my parents aging in their modest retirement community, having lost both daughters in different ways. I felt grief for what could have been if they had been different people, if they had chosen differently, if love had been enough to overcome their dysfunction. But I did not feel guilt. I had given them chances, had extended grace and patience and forgiveness until the moment they hurt my child. Then I had drawn a line that could not be uncrossed, and I would make that same choice again without hesitation. The path forward was not always easy. There were still hard days when I missed having parents, when I saw other families, and felt the ache of loss. There were moments when I doubted myself, worried I was too harsh or unforgiving, wondered if I should have tried harder to make things work. But then I would look at Lily thriving and confident and safe, and I knew I had made the right choice. I would choose her safety and well-being over family obligation every single time. The Quiet Flame Project continued to grow, taking on new staff and expanding our services. We launched a scholarship program for children of domestic violence survivors, helping them access educational opportunities that might otherwise be out of reach. We created support groups for different demographics, recognizing that single mothers had different needs than elderly abuse victims, that LGBTQ individuals faced unique challenges, that cultural factors played a significant role in how people experienced and escaped toxic family dynamics. We held our first annual fundraising gala 18 months after I sat in that hospital hallway and made the phone call to Marcus. The event was held in a beautiful hotel ballroom, attended by supporters and donors and survivors whose stories had become testimonies of resilience. Lily wore a dress she had picked out herself, deep purple with silver stars, and she helped me greet guests as they arrived. Marcus gave a speech about the legal aspects of our work, about the importance of having resources available for people trapped in impossible situations. Several program participants spoke about their experiences, their voices shaking, but determined as they shared how the Quiet Flame Project had helped them escape and rebuild. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of people who had believed in our mission, who had donated time and money and expertise to help strangers build better lives. I talked about that Sunday afternoon, about the moment I realized that protecting my daughter meant destroying the family structure I had spent my life trying to preserve. I talked about learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away, that boundaries were not punishment but protection, that you could not set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I shared statistics about family violence and estrangement, about the rising rates of adult children cutting off contact with parents, about the complex factors that led people to make these difficult choices. I challenged the narrative that family was everything, that blood relations deserved endless chances, no matter how much harm they caused. I talked about the importance of chosen family, of building communities based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation and guilt. And I introduced Lily, who had asked to say a few words. She walked up to the microphone with confidence that still sometimes took my breath away, adjusted it to her height, and spoke clearly to the assembled crowd. She said she used to think that being strong meant not crying or showing when something hurt, that she had to be tough to survive in a world that could be mean. But she had learned from her mom that real strength was being honest about when you were hurt, asking for help when you needed it, and refusing to accept treatment that made you feel small or scared. She held up her arm, showing her scars under the bright lights, and said these marks used to make her feel ashamed, like they were proof that something was wrong with her. Now they reminded her that she had survived something hard and come out okay, that she was tougher than she looked, that her voice mattered. She said she wanted all the kids out there who were scared or hurt to know that it was okay to tell someone that adults should protect you, not harm you, that family was supposed to feel safe. The applause was thunderous. There were tears on many faces, including my own. Lily returned to her seat next to me, and I pulled her close, so proud of this small, fierce human I had the privilege of raising. The event raised over $200,000 more than we had dared to hope for, money that would fund our operations for the next year and allow us to help hundreds more families. In the months and years that followed, our story became part of something larger. Other survivors began sharing their experiences, publicly challenging the stigma around family estrangement, creating a cultural conversation about the limits of forgiveness and the importance of protecting yourself from abuse, even when it came from family. Books were written, documentaries were made, support networks were created. The landscape was shifting slowly but noticeably toward a more nuanced understanding of family dynamics and the validity of cutting ties with toxic relationships. Victoria's story became a cautionary tale in different circles. Think pieces were written about influencer culture and the darkness it could hide, about how social media allowed people to craft false personas while destroying real lives behind the scenes. Some people felt she had been punished enough that public shaming was too harsh. Others argued she got off easy, that assaulting a child should have resulted in criminal charges and jail time. I stayed out of those debates. Victoria's consequences were not mine to manage or moderate. I had done what I needed to do to protect my daughter, and what happened to Victoria after that was between her and the universe. I heard through distant sources that Victoria had moved out of state, changed her name, was working some kind of regular job far from the spotlight she had once craved. My parents apparently still supported her financially to some extent, their enabling patterns unchanged even after everything that had happened. I did not know if Victoria had truly changed or if she had simply learned to hide her true nature better. It did not matter. She would never be part of our lives again, and that was a boundary I would maintain regardless of any apologies or demonstrations of growth. As Lily grew older, entering middle school and then high school, our bond only strengthened. She became involved in the Quiet Flame Project's youth programs, mentoring younger children who had experienced trauma, speaking at schools about recognizing abuse and knowing your worth. She was artistic and empathetic and fiercely protective of underdogs, traits I encouraged and celebrated. She had her struggles too, moments when the lack of extended family hit her hard, times when she grieved for grandparents she barely remembered and an aunt who had hurt her. We processed these feelings together in therapy and in our long talks, acknowledging the complexity of loss and trauma and chosen family. She never expressed interest in reconnecting with my parents or Victoria. She knew they existed, knew the basic facts of what had happened, but she felt no pull toward them. Sometimes she asked questions about them, wanting to understand more about the people who had shaped my early life. I answered honestly, neither demonizing them nor excusing their behavior, trying to give her a balanced picture of the complex, flawed, harmful people they were. I told her that if she ever wanted to meet them when she was older, when she could make that choice as an adult, I would not stand in her way. But I would also not facilitate it or encourage it. That would be her decision to make. For my part, I had done the hard work of grieving the family I thought I had, accepting the reality of who they actually were, and releasing the hope that they would ever change. I had processed my anger and hurt through years of therapy, transforming it into fuel for helping others, rather than poison that destroyed me from the inside. I had learned to stop asking why they had not loved me enough, why I had never been enough for them, why Victoria had been the golden child while I was the scapegoat. The answers did not matter. Their failures were not reflections of my worth, but of their own limitations and dysfunction. I built a life full of meaning and purpose and genuine connection. I dated occasionally, cautiously learning to recognize red flags and trust my instincts about people. I had a few relationships that did not work out, which taught me more about my needs and boundaries. Eventually, I met someone kind and patient who understood my history and loved both Lily and me without trying to fix or change us. It was a slow-building relationship based on friendship. First, someone who proved over time that they were safe and trustworthy. We did not rush toward anything, both of us having learned that the best things were worth patience. The Quiet Flame Project celebrated its 5th anniversary with a gala even larger than the first, attended by celebrities and politicians who had become advocates for our cause, by hundreds of survivors whose lives had been changed by our work, by donors and volunteers and staff members who believed in our mission. We had grown to have offices in 12 states, had helped over 2,000 families, had influenced policy changes at state and federal levels. We had become part of a movement, a shift in how society understood family and abuse, and the right to protect yourself even from the people who were supposed to love you most. During my speech that night, I reflected on the journey from that hospital hallway to this moment, from a scared mother trying to protect her burned child to the leader of an organization changing lives nationwide. I talked about how trauma could be transformed into purpose, how the worst moments of your life could become the foundation for your most meaningful work. I acknowledged that healing was not linear, that there were still hard days, that building something new did not erase the pain of what was lost. But I also celebrated how far we had come, Lily and I, and all the families we had walked alongside. I celebrated the quiet flames burning in each of us, small lights that had refused to be extinguished, that had grown into beacons guiding others out of darkness. I celebrated the courage it took to leave to start over to believe you deserved better, even when everyone told you that you were wrong, ungrateful, destroying your family. I ended my speech by looking directly at Lily now, a beautiful teenager who had grown into her strength and kindness, who had taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into compassion for others. I thanked her for being my teacher, for showing me what resilience looked like, for forgiving me for not protecting her sooner from people I should have cut off years before that terrible Sunday. She stood and came to the stage, and we embraced while the ballroom erupted in applause. That night, as we drove home exhausted but fulfilled, Lily asked me if I ever regretted how everything had turned out, if I ever wished I had found a way to maintain some kind of relationship with my family while still protecting her. I thought about it carefully before answering, wanting to give her the truth she deserved. I told her that I regretted not leaving sooner, not protecting her from Victoria's cruelty in all the years before the burning incident, not recognizing earlier how toxic my family was. I regretted the time I had wasted trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it, the energy I had spent making excuses for their behavior, the ways I had diminished myself to avoid conflict. But I did not regret the choice I made that day in the hospital, and I did not regret any of the consequences that followed. Walking away from my family was the most difficult and most important decision I had ever made, and I would make it again without hesitation. I told her that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in dysfunction anymore, refuse to pretend abuse is acceptable, refuse to sacrifice your child's safety for the sake of keeping peace. I told her that I had learned there was no amount of money or status or blood relation that made hurting children okay, that family should be a source of safety, not harm, that we got to decide who deserved access to our lives based on how they treated us. Lily nodded, satisfied with my answer. She said she was proud of the choice I had made, proud of the life we had built, proud of the people we were becoming. She said she used to wonder why other kids had big families with lots of grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins, and why we just had each other and Marcus and our chosen family. But now she understood that quality mattered more than quantity, that our small circle of genuine love was worth more than a large network of people who hurt us. We pulled into our driveway, the house we had bought with money I earned through the Quiet Flame Project, and careful saving, modest, but ours filled with good memories and no shadows of abuse. As we walked inside, I felt grateful in a way that still sometimes surprised me. Grateful for hard lessons learned, for strength discovered through necessity, for the courage to choose myself and my daughter over the toxic family patterns I had been raised to accept. The journey from that Sunday afternoon to this moment had been long and difficult, filled with grief and anger and fear and doubt. But it had also been transformative, showing me who I really was beneath the layers of conditioning and diminishment. I had discovered I was strong enough to stand alone, brave enough to face consequences, capable of building something meaningful from the ruins of what was destroyed. I had learned that loving yourself was not selfish, that protecting your child was not cruel, that walking away from abuse was not failure but survival. And I had taught Lily these same lessons, giving her the foundation. I had never had the knowledge that she deserved respect and kindness, the understanding that family should feel safe, the courage to use her voice when something was wrong. The scars on her arm had healed into thin silver lines, barely visible unless you knew to look for them. The scars on both our hearts had healed too, not disappeared but integrated into who we had become, reminders of pain we had survived and strength we had discovered. The quiet flame inside me burned steady and bright, no longer hidden or suppressed or apologized for. It warmed our home and lit our path, and had sparked flames in countless others who learned from our story, that they too could escape, could rebuild, could thrive. This was my revenge, not hurting those who hurt me, but living well despite them, proving that their toxicity did not define me, building a legacy of healing and empowerment that would outlast any of the pain they had caused. As I turned off the lights that night and checked on Lily one last time before bed, I felt peace. Not the false peace of silence and submission I had once mistaken for harmony, but the real peace that came from knowing I had done the right thing, protected what mattered most, refused to perpetuate cycles of abuse into another generation. The quiet flame would continue burning in me and in Lily and in all the families we had helped find their way from darkness into light, and that was enough. That was everything.